Mr. Sweigert was born May 31st, 1985 in Reading, Pennsylvania. He was raised there for most of his young life and has a sister. His dad also served in the service, which was part of what influenced him to join. He enlisted in the Air Force instead of going to college, seeing that he could get an education while there and also serve his country. He served there for 8 years. At that time, the Air Force had the best GI benefits. Also, he was always fond of military aircrafts, so it was a win-win for him.
He recalls his first days in basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. He recalls his first few days as rocky and challenging, also as being the runt of the bunch while first there. He was selected for the mechanical electrical part of the military after taking the ASVAB. Seeing as this was a strong suit of his, he was not surprised at this selection. Some experiences he remembers during his basic training are only a few hours after getting off the bus, being tired after the ride there, the officers and funny hats yelling orders at him. One embarrassing moment he would say was while he was delivering a pile of papers to a few drill officers. The door had no hinge on it that made it close fast and hard. Not knowing that, as he was in the room, the door slammed on his back, sending papers flying everywhere. He says he had been chewed out for a solid 20 minutes and stated that he would never forget that moment.
When we asked Mr. Sweigert how he got through it all, he said,
I found it harder as you went through boot camp later in the weeks when you had some free time or you had time to go around the base for an hour or so. That's when it got to be the hardest because you actually had time to think about, like, I'm here, I miss my family, those type of things.
Also, that after a little bit, he conformed to the routine and just went through his daily routine as completing anything that needed to be done.
After basic training, Mr. Sweigert went to specialized training at Kessler Air Force Base in Mississippi. It was right off the Gulf Coast. He said it was a beautiful base to be stationed. While there, Mr. Sweigert was taught electronic principles, which is basically how to be an electrician in 8 weeks. Many of the skills he learned there, he says he still uses today, whether it is around the house or in his car. After his time there, he went back to Texas, which he claims to hate. He made a comparison between the two bases when he said this during our interview with him.
That was like going from a Grand Hyatt to like the Holiday Inn Express minus a few things.
Mr. Sweigert enjoyed his time in special training very much. He said that it was like going to college, except with mandatory physical exercise.
Mr. Sweigert was in a few operations, the main one being Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he was stationed in Ali al-Salim Air Force Base in Kuwait. At the time, the base was a tent city because they had not built many permanent buildings. Mr. Sweigert said that the best part of being in the service was getting to travel the world. Some of his favorite places were the Marshall Islands in the Pacific and in Okinawa, Japan. He said he enjoyed seeing the Japanese bases and bunkers from World War II. He said that while in Kuwait, it was pretty safe except for a few insurgents every now and then. Many of the people were very nice because they were trying to get rid of the dictator next door.
One of the main aircrafts that Mr. Sweigert worked on was the AC-130J, which is a commando solo aircraft, which were used in support of communication missions. He stated,
So the inside of the aircraft in the fuselage is all basically some sort of communication technology, whether it's video, cell phone, radio, and they would go around and fly in a figure-8 pattern and basically take over the airwaves. So once one of those birds was in the air flying around, everything down below, the communications belonged to us.
Mr. Sweigert said that although he never personally experienced any enemy gunfire, he had seen bombings right outside the base a few times. But they didn't last long because the Marines usually went in, and within a few minutes the bad guys
Mr. Sweigert had ever been in the convoy, he said he had been once, and that it was very nerve-wracking for him because he spent most of his time inside the walls of the base. He had heard reports of IEDs and things like that, but he had many Rambos sitting around him, which made him feel very safe. Some of Mr. Sweigert's most memorable experiences were his last few months in his service, that he spent traveling the globe in a series of multinational war games. They had puddle jumped, as they say, from island to island across the Pacific, while in Japan during this time he had assisted in more war games across Asian countries by helping to practice different scenarios in C-130J aircrafts. While on the base, he said it was nice, but at the same time strange. Many things seemed to be in reverse compared to what he usually experienced. Some of those were when he was preparing for bed, the entire city would wake up, and it was interesting to see how different it was over there compared to the U.S.
Mr. Sweigert's time in the service was not very stressful. He said only a few times when he needed to have the plane up and running for a mission did he truly feel any pressure. However, he did have time to relieve stress while he had free time. Some of those were going to the movies, sampling local cuisine, or even drive around and just explore the landscape and the world outside the bases. The base he enjoyed serving in the most was Kwajalein Atoll. He said,
"It was the most beautiful place I've ever been to in my life. The water is clear as day, and..."
Mr. Sweigert says he would be in countries from weeks to months to as little as a couple hours.
Mr. Sweigert was on leave. He stayed at home. He said,
"When I had joined the military, my intention was to go to school at the same time, go to college."
He went to college and graduated from Kutztown University. One time, Mr. Sweigert was at Shepherd Air Force Base and recalled a funny event when he was taking a shower and the room started to smell. The sewer pipes broke and sewage was rising up from the vents and the building was flooded with sewage.
He did not keep a personal diary, but he thought he should have kept one to remember the fun memories he had and the fun places he had been. The favorite part of his job was fixing planes to keep them flying. This began his interest in mechanics. Mr. Sweigert received the Commendation Medal for his hard work and advanced training. He also received the Air Force Achievement Medal. His service ended in February of 2009, and he started a teaching job at Elko in August. Mr. Sweigert made a very close relationship in the service. His name is Heath Hohensie, who lives in Virginia. They sometimes see each other and make up dates to meet up and talk. His time in the service definitely affected his personality and demeanor. The Air Force gave him the ability to become more self-confident and independent. He was able to graduate school with money and no school loans.
When Mr. Sweigert was in the PA National Guard, he worked on the C-130 Hercules. The job Mr. Sweigert had while he was in the Air Force was going to college. He found the Air Force to be very flexible with his college. In the C-130 Hercules, Mr. Sweigert described it as a loud and cold, but he loved the experience. He described the experience like this.
Altitude, I forget what the flying altitude was. It was really cold, and they were not pressurized, so it was cold, it was loud. If you were lucky, you could sit in the flight deck with the pilots.
He described the control panel as...
Yeah, it was like a bunch of TV monitors. It looked like 6 iPads hanging on the flight deck.
Mr. Sweigert began his life in Reading, Pennsylvania. Through his 8 years of service in the military, he was able to experience many different countries and their cultures. He was also able to earn a college degree and come out of the service with no educational loans. Many other experiences, such as receiving the Commendation Medal, the Air Force Achievement Medal, participation in the Operation Iraqi Freedom, serving in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, flying in the C-130 Hercules, and serving in Kwajalein Atoll, helped to shape him into the man that he is today. Being in the military was a positive experience for him. He helped our country to be a safer place on many levels.
Mr. Sweigert was involved with Operation Iraqi Freedom and received a ribbon for participating in that event. He received an oak leaf when he received each ribbon. He reached a level 7, which meant he could perform his job on his own throughout the base. Mr. Sweigert said that coins are very popular in the Air Force. Wherever you go in the Air Force, you are issued a coin. He stated there is a famous tradition.
The tradition goes basically that you always keep a coin in your pocket. So wherever you go, if you go out with your buddies, if someone throws a coin down the table, the last person to get their coin out, that they buy the round of drinks.
Life in Reading, Pennsylvania. Through his 8 years of service in the military, he was able to experience many different countries and their cultures. He was also able to earn a college degree and come out of the service with no educational loans. Many other experiences, such as receiving the Commendation Medal, the Air Force Achievement Medal, participation in the Operation Iraqi Freedom, serving in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, flying in the C-130 Hercules, and serving in Kwajalein Atoll, helped him to shape him into the man he is today. Being in the military was a positive experience for him. He helped our country to be a safer place on many levels.
Mr. Sweigert, we thank you for your time in the service, and it is highly appreciated.
We will always remember you and your time you gave to your country and all of us. Thank you again, Mr. Sweigert.